on your media production, you want to ask yourself two key questions. The first is, what's the purpose of the media project you're working on? Is it an educational piece? Or is it an advocacy piece? Is it a piece that's meant to entertain? Then you want to ask yourself, well, who's your audience? I mean, who are you speaking to when you're putting this video production together? Is it an audience that already knows a lot about the issue? Or is it an audience that doesn't know much about it and is going to need a little bit more hand-holding through the story? In the next video, the video that you're going to see, it's called A Look Back at the Montreal Protocol. And this story played down at the Conference on Stratospheric Ozone in downtown Washington, D.C. And I knew the people who were going to be there already knew the ozone story. So you'll see in the first clip that I start out talking about two scientists, Melina and Rowland, but I don't really explain who they are because I know the audience already knows who they are.
Melina and Rowland made some very important points in their 1975 paper. The main one being that the lifetime of the chlorofluorocarbons is extremely long, 50 to 100 years. There's no way to destroy these gases. Once you put them in, they've got nowhere to go except up to the ozone layer where they're going to destroy it.
The ozone is a protective layer that absorbs the very energetic radiation, and the chlorofluorocarbons won't break up until they get above most of that. And so it's not accidental that the CFCs are tied in with the ozone layer. They are protected until they get up to an altitude of 9 or 10 miles before you start seeing effects of the reaction with solar ultraviolet radiation.
Whenever I work on a media production, I always work on getting my storyline down first, and then I ask myself, how am I going to tell the story visually? What are the images that are going to communicate what the words are saying? So in the next section, you'll look at Robert Watson, who's going to be speaking about how he tried to get scientific consensus in the 80s so that the whole world could take a solid case to the United Nations. And as he's talking about these things, you're going to see images of scientists working together. It's also standard definition footage, so it really gives you that kind of old-timey retrospective feel, taking you back to the 80s when this story was first unfolding.
After I arrived in NASA, I was asked to sort of take over the management of a US-led assessment of ozone depletion. It was mandated by Congress that every 2 years NASA had to write a state of the ozone layer. What seemed logical to me is if we're going to negotiate an international treaty on stratospheric ozone depletion, there needed to be one international assessment where the scientists around the world spoke with one voice. And so during that period, 1980, 1985, I worked with the scientific community to get together a true international assessment that could be the basis for informed international negotiations.
You know, as I look back on what we did in implementing the Montreal Protocol, I think it is probably one of the most successful cooperative efforts that I have ever seen between, in this case, a regulatory agency, the EPA, a regulated agency, the Department of Defense, the NGOs, their suppliers, and their counterparts in other countries. And the fact of the matter is, it worked. It was incredibly successful.
So when you're working on your media production, ask yourself, what's the best visual communication tool that I can use to help tell the story? Is it best told through photography? Is it best told through original video footage that you're going to go out and shoot? Or is it footage that you need to get from an outside organization? If it's footage you're going to get from an outside organization, you have to make sure it's not copyrighted material. In the next clip you're going to see, I used a lot of footage from the NASA archives. And all the media that's created by the government is public domain media, so it's free for the public to use. So I use that, and I also use some animations to help tell my story.
Suddenly there was a paper by Joe Farman, who had a Dobson instrument located in Antarctica at Halley Bay, that suggested that in the springtime, August, September, October period, there was a sudden depletion of ozone. A series of international experiments was done. The biggest one was in 1987, where there were some ground-based observations, 2 very well-equipped aircraft, a DC-8 and an ER-2, and some satellite observations. And it became very, very clear very quickly we humans were having a direct effect that was unambiguous on the ozone layer.
Okay, so I want to talk to you a second about post-production, right? Post-production is where you can really make those visual images pop. You use programs like Photoshop and Final Cut Pro to make the images really look their best. So in the next clip that you're going to see some images of the Arctic, and you'll notice that the people are really dark, and they're like silhouettes, and they really stand out from that white ice. And I wanted them to pop like that because it was a little more artistic approach. And then you're also going to see some gentle zoom ins and zoom outs on some of the images. And that was to give it a bit of movement and to convey some emotion. And the emotion you'll see goes along well with the music. And music is something else that you put in post-production, and it really helps to give the piece a rhythm and a feel.
I have to say it was tremendously exciting to go to Antarctica. You know, you realize when you're there how incredibly remote and beautiful and untouched the place is. And it's so ironic to sit there and watch the ozone layer disappear.
Well, I think the key development in industry was when the DuPont company, which was the major U.S. manufacturer of chlorofluorocarbons, an $800 million revenue item, by the way, for them, when they concluded that the scientists were right.
The Montreal Protocol was signed in September of 1987. It was shortly after that that the results of the Antarctic aircraft expedition came out, and the decision was made on Friday afternoon, 3 days after the release of the report, that we would commit to a total phase-out of CFCs.
It was the first time I had ever seen companies come together on something that if they withheld information and kept it proprietary, it would give them a competitive advantage.
Okay, so the next section you're going to see is the conclusion to my video, Look Back at the Montreal Protocol. You'll see that I end this video with a really powerful image, and it's an image of what the world looks like today and what it would have looked like if we had not regulated CFCs back in the 80s. So when you're working on your story, think about a powerful anecdote or a powerful quote or a powerful image that you can end on. You don't want to leave your viewer hanging. You know, just like when you're reading a book and you reach the concluding chapter, you know, you want to feel good and that as a reader, that all your questions have been answered. And the same thing goes for when you're watching a video piece.
I think the #1 lesson is you have to have really good science. It has to be done extremely carefully. It has to be verified by multiple sets of observations and by multiple different models.
We need to have coordinated research globally and international assessments so that the scientific community talks with one voice to the international negotiators.
Because of the spirit of cooperation with the government setting standards that were challenging yet flexible, allowed industry to innovate, industry came forward, and everyone worked together to make this happen.
I think the intersection of science and public policy is a lesson there. Science really drove that. Science is what made me confident that the public policy position I was advocating was sound, was supportable, was going to be important to the future. We have a substantial scientific establishment, and they were right on this issue, it turns out. And when it was just a hypothesis, later it was all confirmed. And I think the same is true on climate change. Now we're getting not just computer models, but observations. So there's every reason to follow the same course, listen to the same scientific opinion.
And lastly, I wanted to direct you to some really fantastic resources that you can use in your media project. So the first is nasa.gov. Do a simple search under your topic. You're going to come up with some great resources. They're really good videos and images associated with the different stories, and you can use those. Those are free for you to use for educational purposes. The next one is the Scientific Visualization Studio, svs.gsfc.nasa.gov. This is an amazing resource of animations and visualizations. They cover planetary, helio, and earth science stories, and I really encourage you to use it. It's some really great, beautiful imagery. And last but not least is the Earth Observatory. The Earth Observatory covers stories about the Earth. And again, beautiful images on this site as well. Remember that your job is to keep your viewers' attention, and the images you'll find here are going to help you do that.